Now, I've been a fighting game fan for years. Street Fighter, Tekken, Soul Calibur, Mortal Kombat, King of Fighters, Guilty Gear. If it's a fighting game, I was guaranteed to want to play it. But there was one that never really piqued my interest, and that was Dead or Alive. Dead or Alive is known as being a very fan-servicey game, and the marketing for the game just never really appealed to me. When games usually resort to sexuality to sell, I usually attribute a lot of that to be desperation. Especially for, if it's a pristine fighting game franchise, why would you resort to this? It seems a lot of people in the fighting game community had similar views. It was seen as more of a joke in the fighting game community for its casual combos and over-the-top fan service. I heard a rare voice come up and say that the game is actually really good, which I met with a hesitant, sure. One of the days though, on searching fighting games for the 3DS, I came across Dead or Alive Dimensions. I didn't expect much from it, but once I finished it, I became a complete fan of the series. I ate my words completely, and I have to admit this is a great fighter. I'm going to be looking at the series up to this point and hopefully give you a bit of information about some of the best and worst games in this retrospective. I will be looking at the definitive versions of the game, Dead or Alive Ultimate 1 and 2, 3, 4, Last Round and 6. And won't be talking about the spin-offs like the Volleyball and Venus Vacation games, which honestly aren't my thing. You enjoy them cool, but they just don't appeal to me. So let's start at the beginning with Dead or Alive Ultimate, the game that started it all. Dead or Alive is a very early game, released in 1996 in arcades, to Saturn in 1997 and the PlayStation in 1998. A franchise going on nearly 30 years by visionary director Itagaki, known for his quite out-there personality and love of action-oriented things. After playing Virtua Fighter, he decided to throw his hand into the 3D fighting game ring, and created Dead or Alive. Because of how early a 3D game it is, expecting the graphics to have aged gracefully may be asking for a lot, but on the other hand, considering its age, it's pretty nice looking for an early 3D fighter. There's always something I found comforting about the blocky polygonal 3D of the early games on the PlayStation and Saturn. I don't know if it's nostalgia possibly, but sometimes I enjoy the graphics of games like this in the original Tekken trilogy. With games focusing so much on realism nowadays, I like to play a game that looks like a more stereotypical game. But realism is one thing, and even age visuals can still stand out and be memorable, with some personality, passion and charm behind the scenes. And that's what makes aged games beautiful to this day. And with Dead or Alive, unfortunately, it's very down the middle with its visuals. While stuff like the character select screen and logo screen personality, when you actually play the game, I can't honestly say there's much variety to get attached to here. Dead or Alive, known for its expansive environments, stage transitions that have become a core part of the series, are understandably missing in this game. Most matches take place in a square ring with different backgrounds, and while they're not visually offensive, they're not exactly memorable. The only two I seem to recall off the top of my head are the lightning stage, since I like the lightning stage, and the final stage, which seems to have the most work put into it. The sound to go with the visuals falls in the same category of forgetfulness. Besides the main menu theme, I can't say there's anything here that really stands out too much to me. It's okay to vibe to, but it's pretty generic fighting game music. I would even go as far as to say it's a product of them not fully understanding the vibe they were going for in the original Dead or Alive. There's nothing laughable, nothing super annoying, it's just all there to vibe through. I will have to mention something about the visuals you may have noticed or know Dead or Alive for, and I just want to get this part out of the way, and that's the jiggle physics. You see, the true enemy to the girls in Dead or Alive is wearing a bra. It can kind of be a bit distracting. Instead of breasts, sometimes it looks like the girls are trying to smuggle jello across the border. This was apparently a big selling point at the time. Polygonal boobies were all the rage at the time. There was nothing sexier in the 90s than seeing a polygonal rack you could cut your hands on. Other than that, the character models are great for the time. Comparing them to other 3D fighters, I think they're up to about Tekken 2 standards. Not up to Tekken 3. I think it does look much better than Virtua Fighter. But as much as I respect Virtua Fighter, yeah, it doesn't look the best. The models might be very blocky, but there's enough detail to give every character their own variety and personality. Before I talk about the characters, I must talk about the story of this game. Well, what happened before that led to the first tournament. Shiden and Raido were two brothers growing up in the Mugen Tenshin clan. Raido the eldest was in line to be the next head of the clan, but he managed to fall to the dark side. You know, the Empire's pretty chill and stuff. So with that, their father decides to choose Shiden as his successor. This involves the tradition of teaching the special move, the Torn Sky Blast, which is only taught to the leader of the clan. Raido is pretty sulky and kills his daddy before disappearing into the night to train and become the strongest fighter in the world. Years later, Shiden has 2 children, Hayate and Kasumi, and when the time comes, Hayate is named the new leader of the Mugen Intention clan and taught the Torn Sky Blast, which means Raido travels back. I don't know if this is something he learned or if it's genetic, but later events show it's sort of genetic, but Raido is able to immediately copy a move when he sees it. With that, he goes back to his clan's village, game and Shiden, and starts a big brawl with Hayate, which ends up with Hayate busting out his special move, which Raido copies instantly before he ends up slapping Hayate, leaving him paralysed and comatose. Kasumi, who is the next leader in the ranks, ends up running away from her clan, leading her to become a runaway shinobi and marked for death by her village. The reason she does this is to get revenge on Raido, who is also in the Dead or Alive tournament. One thing I must say Dead or Alive managed to nail from the absolute start was the characters. Our main lead, Kasumi, a red-haired runaway shinobi from the Mugen Intention clan, is our main character. Her fighting style is an all-rounder with swift strikes and an average hold and guard game. But she's not the only one. Tina debuts here, a professional wrestler who has a blend of fast strikes but grapple throws. She joined the competition in order to start off her acting. Jan Lee is the token Bruce Lee character who's speedy and focuses on long combos with a devastating finish. His kicks are very fast and have good range. An orphan infatuated with kung fu movies from a young age who honed his body to perfection and wants to prove he's the best fighter in the world. Unfortunately, he made a fatal mistake, and that was saving a woman. One night he saves a woman from 3 crooks who, instead of being happy, she is actually a trained martial artist who didn't need his help, and decides to make him his main rival. This woman is named Lei Feng, a kung fu master who joins the Dead or Alive tournament to prove herself in the fighting world, and also has a score to settle with Jan Li. She has a similar fast striking and kick style, however she is a much more technical fighter. Zack, a DJ and fighter who's joined solely for the money, Zack has actually become a character I really like over time, and mainly serves as the comic relief character. Bayman, whose strength is in reversal and combo throws, only joined the tournament to get closer to his target, Fane Douglas, the head of Duotech, which he actually succeeded at, as sometime during the main tournament he manages to take out Fane Douglas, and not in a date type of way. The next character introduced is definitely the most noble person there is in the tournament. Genfu, who has joined the tournament in order to get the prize money to save his granddaughter Mei Lin, who is suffering from a serious illness. He was once known as the Iron Fist, one of the most feared fighters in the world. Even in his old age, he enters to try his best to win. Genfu is similar to Lei Feng in a fighting style, and that is technical. His character is much more about striking right with hard moves. And the final character I'm going to talk about is the little legend himself, Ryu Hayabusa, who's another great all-around character. However, his moveset is probably one of the hardest to master, dealing with combo throws like the Iruka drop. Ryu is a great character if you're willing to put in the time to learn how to use him. He's probably the most well-known from the Dead or Alive series, seeing as he's also the lead character in his own series, Ninja Gaiden. While in this game he originally started based on the original Ninja Gaiden from 1987, the reboot that came out with iconic games like Ninja Gaiden Black and 2 ended up being such a success, this was reconnected to the reboot Ryu Hayabusa. And yes, this means the Ninja Gaiden and Dead or Alive games take place in the same continuity, with his appearance in this game roughly taking place a year after Ninja Gaiden 2. This is the original cast of characters. Later versions added in Raido as a playable character, and the PlayStation 1 version added in Ayane as a playable character. Ayane is very similar to Kasumi in that she's an all-round character, and Raido is a hard hitter, maybe a little OP being he is a boss character. Now, not much is known as how everyone placed in the tournament, but it has been confirmed the finals took place between Tina and Kasumi. Kasumi winning but denying the money which went to Tina. Kasumi then went on to fight Raido, and with a little bit of help from Ryo, manages to come out on top, getting her vengeance and destroying him. Unfortunately, while she's worn down, she manages to get kidnapped by Duotech, and that's where the game comes to a close. So, I've spoken about the characters and the visuals, but the main thing I have to talk about is the gameplay. Is the game fun? Does it play well? And what differentiates it from all the other 3D fighters? Well, I mentioned how a lot of the characters play, but even if one character may excel or be less effective in some areas, all characters can effectively be played in the same way. Dead or Alive works on a 3-tier system: strikes beat throws, throws beat holds, and holds beat strikes, a perfect circle. By pressing the hold button at the right time and pulling back just as your opponent strikes, you can perform a reversal, but getting the hold wrong can leave you open for a throw. This is the system in its simplest forms. Unlike the later games that have holes for higher, lower and upper by holding back in that direction, in the first game all upper attacks are simply reversed by pressing the hold button at the right time, and to reverse the lower attacks you crouch and press the hold button. This is a much simpler version of the hold system than in later games, but there's another significant difference in the gameplay. I mentioned the stages previously being smaller than later games with no environmental changes, instead pushing your opponent outside the part of the ring will make them land in an explosion which will send them flying back up into the air. The bouncy mechanic, if played right, you can greatly extend your combos. It opens up a lot of possibilities, even though I've never put much time into Dead or Alive 1 to actually get the most out of it. This is the core mechanics. Unfortunately, how these mechanics play out isn't great. This game works on a much different engine than later games, based more on Virtua Fighter, and it's just not as fluid. Characters seem stiffer and slower than they usually do, and while a lot of characters have kept similar movesets to later games, it just doesn't feel the same as you might expect. It's got that early 90s game jank that was in the original Tekken, and even with the resolution improved in Dead or Alive Ultimate, the game was still built around that slower engine. Is it terrible? No, it's completely fine and serviceable. It does its jobs, but I will say that it's definitely hard to go back to if you play the later games. If I did have to pick out one massive flaw in this game though, it would be the health system. Combos are pretty much nullified as 3 or 4 strong hits will completely destroy your opponent. Dead or Alive was designed as a fast-paced game, which means matches can be over almost immediately with a few well-placed hits. This can honestly ruin the pace of the game, and I feel like it just makes some characters better than others. Characters like Kasumi and Hayabusa feel a lot more impactful than slower characters like Genfu. It's pretty hard to play a technical strategy when it takes only a couple of hits to wear you down. Waiting for the right opening is pretty difficult when your opponent has already slapped down 3/4 of your health bar. Dead or Alive 1 Ultimate actually has the distinction of being one of the first games to include online play, but for some reason I couldn't find anyone playing. The team battle mode is where you pick a set number of characters and your opponent has the same number of characters, and when you go down, another fighter pops up. I think I've hardly touched this mode in single player, but honestly, if you have a second player with you, this can definitely be a great competition and great fun. The other modes have less change. Time attack mode is going to arcade mode to see how fast you can get, and survival is gauntlet to see how you can survive against a barrage of opponents, and they're pretty self-explanatory. While Dead or Alive has a story mode that's going on, outside of the manual and retrospective in later games that flesh out what happened at this tournament, there isn't too much of a story given to you. Each character will get a bit of info and description about them and what's brought them here, but that's about it. I was sad to see that this game didn't have any ending cutscenes or even mentioning of an ending when completing the arcade mode, not even any text or anything that happens. Even Ayane, a character who was added in the PlayStation port, was retconned in later games to appear throughout the first tournament, even though she doesn't affect anything majorly and is really only there to kill Kasumi. I'll talk much more about Ayane when I get to my Dead or Alive 2 review, as she begins to play a much bigger role in the story from that point on. And most people are familiar with her appearing in that game. So why should you even beat the mods? What incentive is there to beat the arcade mode? Well, this is another staple of Dead or Alive that started here, and it's multiple costumes. Every time you beat arcade mode with a character, you unlock a new costume, and there's multiple to unlock, which means if you want them all, you'll have to go through the arcade mode multiple times with each character. Raido is also an unlockable character who also has his own unlockable costumes. While it definitely was normal to expect a primary and secondary costume in games at this time, to have this many in such an early game is pretty much unheard of. This game makes certain that if you have a favourite character, you're going to definitely have a costume that suits your style. Dead or Alive deserves its props. A lot of great ideas were started here, but it wasn't defined. It's clear they had a grand vision for this game that they put their heart into, and there is so much here. However, the limitations of the technology at the time allowed this game to not reach its full potential. While the original Dead or Alive was a great game at the time, it is not aged well like the original Tekken I'd compare it to, although I feel Tekken has more work due to having much more unlockable characters and endings that are fun to watch for completing the game. Dead or Alive 1 was a great test, a great starting point, but I can honestly say that it's not really worth going back to unless you're a hardcore DOA fan and want to test it out of curiosity.